it would be great to just kick off with a couple of quick intros, and then we'll get into the discussion. So, Dave, you want to start us off real quick?
Sure. Dave Newton. I work with Albertsons, which is, for anyone that's not familiar with us, right? One of the largest grocers, supermarket chains in the U.S. We operate under about 22 different banners, pretty well throughout the U.S., including Alaska and Hawaii. So my area, I'm specifically responsible for the technology that runs our supply chain. So that's right across our 18 manufacturing plants, right? 22 distribution centers, private transportation fleet, and all the operations that support that, but really about the technology that underpins all of that.
Awesome. Jeff?
Sure. I'm Jeff Shura. I work with Conagra Brands. I lead the technical services team within engineering. So that's our building envelope, utilities, infrastructure across our 43 sites in North America. Part of that, though, I have the OT layer as well, and I'm leading with a partner in our IT organization, our digital manufacturing initiative.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. I'll start by saying thanks for the food. It's important. Yeah. So we all appreciate that. As one of the most important essential business sector, your operations obviously never shut down during the pandemic. In fact, I think a lot of food and beverage producers and distributors saw just insane increases in demand across certain categories. And as a result, you had to deploy a lot of new tech and strategies to deal with that. So I think in some ways, food and beverage pulled ahead a little bit in terms of digital maturity versus other industries. I feel like anytime I talk to anyone in any manufacturing sector, they always say, "Oh, we're really far behind digitally from the other industries." But just from where I'm sitting in conversations I've had, I think we've seen a lot of cool stuff in the food and beverage sector over the past couple of years, and that's what I want to talk about today, right? So I think I've had this conversation offline with both of you, but for the new folks who are here today, I'd be interested to hear just what were some of the strategies that your companies employed to keep up with demand and to avoid stockouts during the pandemic? Who wants to jump on that one?
I'll go if you want.
Yeah.
Sure. So, pandemic definitely was an ever evolving scenario, right? In our industry, as we talk about, it caused some industries to be really quiet, right? And some like ours to be busy, very busy, right? It's an industry that is all about, pretty low margins, all about volume, but, a big volume increase on our world is, 3 or 4%. And suddenly it became numbers more like 30, right? So think of that in terms of 10 years growth in 30 days. Okay. So, and obviously this, if you look at back, as you said, people hadn't pushed, supply chain and manufacturing to be maybe the most adaptable because it was tuned to optimize cost, right? That had been the imperative. It was fairly predictable. Let's make it as cost efficient as you can. Well, suddenly that got turned on its head, right? So now is how do you expand and how do you cover that demand? And to tie back to the last session, to some degree, it starts with people, right? How are you going to deal with that volume and process it? So start with where do you get people? Because you need a lot more. So that comes with partnerships, right? In our case, we partnered with other companies that had gone quiet. A lot of the people in the service industries, right? They went quiet in terms of hospitality, but they're well suited to serve customers. So they're good candidates for the stores. A lot of the food service that fills up cafeterias and restaurants, have good capacity to process packaging and stuff in a warehouse. We could partner with them to help expand our environments. So I think really if you think of them, really where did it go? You had to deal with how do you establish partnerships so that you could scale up, really quickly by pairing what you needed with what others had plenty to go around, right? And use their capacity to streamline ours. So I think that partnership aspect was really initially, absolutely some of the key to keep that flowing.
Interesting. What do you think, Jeff?
Oh, yeah, as a supplier, we've had our challenges, as Dave mentioned. Demand significantly increased during the early part of the pandemic, and it caused us to really be as flexible as possible. You know, we were in a changing environment with suppliers, with manufacturing, with our teams and our associates at our facilities, the communities that we operate our facilities in, and then logistics, bringing the product to our customers. There were points that we had 500 trucks ready to unload and not enough places to unload them. So it was all that ripple effect through the supply chain that really caused us to be as flexible as possible, but also prioritize our product offerings. So working with our customers, with our suppliers, our manufacturing facilities loved that. That was the big runners running all out. But again, it's how do we balance that with our team members? New associates, onboarding thousands of new associates and employees to help us continue manufacturing. Lines that have been pretty steady all of a sudden went up to 24/7 operations for months in a very difficult and trying time. So that flexibility, the onboarding of people, communicating across the supply chain, really looking holistically at that end-to-end supply chain and making adjustments daily was part of what we just needed to do to keep the products flowing to the country. So very challenging time. We had just started our digital manufacturing transformation just a month or two prior to the pandemic really taking hold. So we didn't have a lot of the tools that we're currently developing ready to deploy. And so we had to do a little bit old school style, which really gives us an appreciation for what we're developing now in terms of that digital transformation for us, both from a manufacturing, but really end-to-end supply chain.
And adding on to some of that, right? When we talk about the partnerships, what somehow some of that played is, demand was up so much, the product, of course, we could carry it for so many days. Right, stores ran out, then warehouses ran out, and then suppliers ran out, right? So people saw it as one surge. It wasn't. There was really three distinct ones. They just evolved. Everybody had their favorite product run story over the course, right? Whether it was rice and pasta or toilet paper, or then facial appearance, products for people spending all their time on Zoom. So it evolved over time. But one of the partnerships on that comes with us working with partners, Conagra and other producers, is how can we optimize their lines? So consumers were used to the idea that, hey, you go pick your favorite pasta, you can get 40 different kinds in each of 6 different sizes. Well, you know what? It's much more efficient for the manufacturing, both our plants and others, instead of, such a wide variety, produce one size 6 kinds, and you get longer, faster production runs, which increases net volume. So consumers saw product appear, but nowhere near as much, the breadth of sizes and adjustments to the product. So I think that became a very big change in the whole supply chain. What is really needed, what maximizes throughput, became an issue because the whole supply chain changed from, quite honestly, the U.S. food supply chain historically was very good at whatever that someone wants to buy, the supply chain will provide, right? It was very much we'll get you what you'll pay for. And it switched over to, you'll buy what we can get for you. That's a complete reversal.
You're right, David. It was really those partnerships that we really appreciated throughout. We have great partnerships with our customers and our suppliers. It just really cemented those throughout that journey. We had to think differently, had to work even more closely together, and we really appreciated that effort. I hope that continues through post-pandemic times because it really helped our partners, our suppliers, our customers really work through what's the most efficient model for all of us, and that ultimately gets that out to our consumers.
Yeah. Partnerships are important. And Dave, the thing that you mentioned, just that idea of SKU consolidation, we've seen that across so many manufacturing sectors over the last 18 months is, I'm not going to give you 40 things. I'm going to just make the 2 most popular ones and you're going to eat them, right? Because you don't have a choice. So, kind of transitioning out of pandemic response, I want to talk about, again, it's a total cliche, the lasting efficiencies of pandemic response. But I would be interested to hear which of the things that you did over the past 18 months do you think will become longer term operational strategies that are permanent? Obviously some of the things that we all had to do over the last 18 months we're going to stop doing, I hope. But which of those are going to be lasting operational strategies?
Clearly the assortment, consumers will, start to desire the broader assortment, and that will, that one won't last. And the only question is how well, at what pace that it returns, right? And people's changing flow on what they want. But if you think about it, things that last, what drove that was those partnerships and working closer across the entire supply chain, right? Our merchants on how they want to merchandise that, to what we could provide, to what we could work with our partners to be most efficient about providing. And I think that has inherently changed the structure of the conversation with the suppliers on what they want. But because this is a little bit about technology, right? What then behind that is obviously that started with not so much structured, embodied, pre-planned conversation, because it was like, boom, tomorrow. But that's what's evolving, right? Closer methods to work, tighter communication and more direct interchange of information with the partners, how we can work closer together to completely streamline that. And not just, hey, we'll talk to you about what you can give us, but the whole view of that supply chain from the time that we work with them on what we're going to buy to knowing when it arrives in our building, whether, maybe a warehouse or, and then of course we already always had the visibility out to the stores and to the consumer, but that connection back and including the movement of goods, that is absolutely a big one. And then of course the other one is all about labor, right down to that first conversation. The workforce had to really grow. But you mentioned retirement in the early one, right? On some of them, particularly in manufacturing plants and others, the systems and technology need to be improved to support quicker learning, onboarding, and develop, ability to deal with the complicated tasks as well as the repetitive tasks. So now how do you do that? And that's where, that's the second avenue of industrial tech that grew, but some of that has a lead time, right? So that one's certainly going to continue.
Yeah, I would agree, Dave. One of the things that we saw and we continue to see that is that end-to-end supply chain view. You mentioned we depleted all of our inventories very quickly, and we want to run lean, right? That's a great model for us, but how can we become more flexible? How do we look at the demand signals differently? How do we work with our customers and ultimately predict what our consumers are wanting? So that's going to continue. It's going to accelerate. I know in our business and in our organization that we are actively pursuing that from a transformation for us. And on my day job, it's really on the capital project side. We had major construction projects underway during all of this. We had to think about crews of 200 plus construction workers on greenfield sites or brownfield sites to add capacity to our already constrained businesses. We had to keep those projects moving. We had to think about virtual factory acceptance tests. How do we bring equipment from around the world to our sites that's on order? So that technology continues today, even as we've seen easing, is we are sending smaller teams, but we're doing quite a bit more virtually. We're working through the project earlier, process earlier to validate and verify, leveraging technology so that we can install the equipment that we need on time. The safety of our associates, our construction workers, the checks that we put in place during the pandemic to automate those, to get the crews through the process very quickly so they can get back to the tools on the sites, and then how do we protect those workers throughout. All of those will continue. The environment in our facilities, as we think about food processing and the filtration of air, we've not only do that with our production and process areas, but we're looking at our welfare areas as well. So a lot of changes that will continue because of this, and I think will ultimately make our associates safer and continue to drive that value throughout our supply chain.
No, that's great, guys. So, one of the things that we've kind of hinted at throughout the discussion so far is just tech, right? So I do want to jump towards some of the. He's always right on time. It's like he knows when I'm doing something important. But I think over the past few years, there's been so much hype about Industry 4.0 and digital technologies and manufacturing and supply chain. And obviously the space has been slower than people want it to be, and a lot of it is just frankly nonsense, right? But talking to you guys and learning about the real areas where you're investing in digital technologies and seeing ROI, I think is really interesting. So Jeff, you had said, you guys had just started your digital manufacturing transformation right before the pandemic. I would be interested to hear, what are some of the pillars of that program? Where are some of the areas that you're seeing return on the investment? What does that look like?
Sure, absolutely, Isaac. So what we did, we started really from scratch. We have automated facilities, but we weren't gathering the data from our unit operations efficiently. To create that data-rich environment, we'll go back and analyze or leverage other technologies to help us understand our lines, our capacities, where we have choke points differently, our yield loss. The other team mentioned that earlier today. Some of the traditional buckets of opportunity for our facilities. So we're focusing on what we call foundational applications of technology, getting the information from our unit operations more automatically versus our paper processes of old, communicating with our associates so they have that information when they need it, where they need it during the manufacturing process, providing dashboards and alerts to those team members so that we know and anticipating when our lines are deviating from center line. And then also looking at bringing the power of that data to our yield analytics. So whereas we would look before and engage our teams, our continuous improvement teams, we're going to be gathering that information and providing it to them so they can leverage that much more quickly to drive out those lost points. That's where we're seeing the value that will be coming for us. Again, we're still in the early phases of our journey. Some of the other areas that, as you think about the connected worker for operations, connected worker for maintenance and quality, also very crucial to driving out those lost points for the team, increasing the overall performance and efficiency of our lines. So those are going to be developed on the same platform for us. So those are the initial buckets. As we start to do that, we're operating within the four walls of the facility, addressing those needs. But we know that once we start to build that data-rich environment, we'll be able to look outside of the manufacturing sites to see those production cycle impacts, to see efficiencies of planning and scheduling for us, and start to work through the rest of supply chain. So that's where we're believe it's coming from. But again, we're still fairly early on in the development of some of those use cases and deployment.
Thanks, Jeff. Yeah, Dave, what about you?
Yeah, so I think that while you hear about the hype cycle, there's actually a lot of reality in terms of, the use of, whether you want to call it industrial Rev 4.0, right? We've been moving forwards in, if you think about it, warehouses, right? You work in a more of a confined area. Of course, a lot of automation started off in manufacturing because, there is a predictability to that. In terms of what you're running on your line. So we have some of that. But if you think in our warehouse environment, right, we've been moving to more and more automation. We have at least 2 of our sites run fully autonomous bots in terms of, complete, bring the pallet in, drop it off, have it go away somewhere until it comes back out as a pallet to go to a store, right? And all of that is not quite dark, but essentially it all runs, pretty autonomously with tech running and keeping track of where everything is. So, and that's within the walls of the warehouse. Now you get into that starts to continuously grow and expand. Whether that, last call they talked about ability to know where people are. We look at sensors to help keep people safe, right? That's something we were actually working with Landmark on, right? How do we improve the safety of our people over the last year using technology to provide information to ensure that they can be trained and kept safe and healthy to do their job, right? And that becomes more and more important as you have a greater staff turnover. So that helps address on that side. On the other hand, you've got this retiring thing of the deep expertise. Well, how do you capture that? Well, one way is you do that with the sensors and capture. You capture more data, and it's not just letting people know when something's broken, which is when you look backwards, that's what we used to do, right? We're starting to capture those sensors with intelligence to predict when it's going to be solved. Whereas before it took that very fine expert to be able to know when something was going to go down. AI and sensors can help predict it and, direct someone to go do something about it before it impacts your line. So it is actually very much emerging right now. It's coming to be from hype to reality, in the current time.
Yeah, I would agree, Dave. And it's really that meaningful, actionable information that we can provide our teams, right? Versus just taking recordings and putting them in a file cabinet somewhere for some other reason. It's more near real time. It provides them the information. They can act directly. We can predict things starting to happen. We can see things starting to drift out of center line and then quickly respond to do that. Those are the things that we're seeing. That's the immediate gains for us. It's driving that standard work process, is getting our lines of manufacturing into control again if they were out of control. So then you can start to optimize those systems and processes. So it's really a jump start in that, and really a big enabler for us to do it much more quickly than we had before.
So it's really interesting times, right? This stuff is becoming reality, and pandemic, the key word there was flexibility, right? And we weren't really set up for flexibility 2 years ago. We were set up for cost reduction, streamline, and volume. But now, how can you flex and adapt to whatever gets tossed at your supply chain? Because, our mission is so that, Isaac, when you walk in, you can get that favorite one size of cornflakes that you wanted to get off the shelf at the moment you want to pick it up, right? Doesn't need to be there yesterday. It needs to be there when you want to pick it up. And that's the measure of success for quite honestly, for our whole supply chain, right? We want to get the product to you at the moment you want to be able to have it.
Drop the mic, Dave. We should give you guys mics to drop.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I'll throw my puck. All right.
Yeah. Jeff, did you want to say one more thing?
No, Dave said it well.
Okay. Great. Well, I also, once again, want to make sure that we stick with our program here. But guys, I just want to thank you so much for sharing some insights on, pandemic response, future operational strategies, technology. Just really, really insightful to hear from you.